Let's dive in. So just to recap where we are holding. So we learned through the questions, the 5 questions that the Baal HaSulam wanted to frame the entire essay with. Questions about understanding ourselves, who we are, what is the self, what is our mahus, what is our function and purpose as little tiny specks of dust in the giant chain of reality and the giant plane of creation. What purpose could we possibly be serving? How does our shiftless and our imperfection and our kilkul, etc., that we sense about ourselves, how does that come about from the perfection and shleimus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? How does the goodness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu produce pain and suffering and so on and so forth? And how does the eternal nature of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the unchanging eternal nature of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, produce a changing temporary reality? Where does any of that come from? How does it come about? And we talked about the chakiros, the 6 chakiros that he went through, which were all grounded in trying to understand, number one, what is novel about creation? There can't be anything novel about creation on the one hand, because everything is already nichlal in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so how could it be that anything new is coming about? On the other hand, we know that the Bria is something new. If it wasn't something new, then there would be nothing to talk about, and there wouldn't be any Bereshis, and there would be no need to actually move from a pre-Bereshis to a post-Bereshis. And we know, he didn't say this, but we know that, right, we at some point, for something, we don't have permission to go looking for something that is before the days of Bereshis, so to speak, right? Whatever is before Bereshis, whatever is Lamala Mimcha, et cetera, we're not supposed to be going there. There's something else that happened before. There was a thing that happened before, and then there's something new, a new reality within which we are supposed to investigate and understand, and so on and so forth. This also relates well, okay, right? Fine, we'll leave it at that. So that was one chakira. The other chakira was so what is this new thing? If there's newness being created, how is newness happening? What is new? And the idea of the neshama, what is this neshama, the chelek elokami mal? We understand what a chelek of a whole is in material terms. And always when you have a chelek of a whole, something has to be used to divide the chelek from the whole. And what is that thing when it comes to the spiritual reality of the chelek elokami mal? And how does it make any sense to talk about a chelek elokami mal if the chelek is really, if the mimal is really indivisible, the elokami mal is really indivisible on the one hand, and on the other hand, anything that we chip off of the mountain, so to speak, is going to be the entire mountain by definition, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is indivisible. What does it mean to have a chelek elokami mal? What can that possibly imply? How should we understand that? He talked about where does the Sitra Achar come from, klipos, the opposite of kedusha, choshech, etc. Where is that coming from? What is the nature of it? It can't be coming from something opposite or opposed to or separate from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It has to be coming from HaKadosh Baruch Hu itself, because Yichud Hashem says that there is nothing else. On the other hand, the whole idea of the Sitra Achra and the Yetzer Hara and Klipos and so on and so forth is that these things are Rachok me kedusha b'tachlis ha-richuk, and if so, what are they? Where do they come from? What function do they serve? He talked about Tchias HaMesim. He wanted to understand how it is that Tchias HaMesim happens. What's the purpose of it? The body is lowly. Why are we being Machaya? Why does HaKadosh Baruch Hu want to be Machaya the body? Why is he bringing back bodies the way that they were originally, so that people can recognize the body before he then fixes the body and makes the body perfect? What does all of that mean? And then finally, again, he talked about the trying to understand or trying to investigate that the idea of bishvili nivra olam. How can it be that bishvili nivra olam, we're nothings, We're nothings. We sense that we're nothings, at least if we sit and abstract away from our ego a little bit. And I think that we're already talking about, and he's talking to people who are already a little bit, on a path to get somewhere, right? He started off with, right? We're dealing with questions that people are not satisfied with. There has to be some lack of satisfaction. Lack of satisfaction is coming from, I am already in the game, right? I'm in the game. I'm thinking about these things. If you're thinking about these things, you're already expanding a little bit beyond like, I am the center of everything. And if you're thinking about bigger things, and then really I'm not the center of everything. So what does it mean for me to be the center of everything, Bishvili Never Olam, etc. So that's where we're holding. He's just asked questions. He's raised Hakiros to try and prompt further thought. And now, finally, in paragraph Daled, we're going to get into the beginning. Okay, the beginning of starting to answer these questions, and the place to start, of course, to the beginning is really he's going to start at the end, right? So the beginning is Tachlis Habriya. What is the purpose of everything? Which in truth is the beginning. It's not only the end. Tachlis is usually the goal, the objective, the purpose. Goals, purposes, and objectives come at the end of a process. We achieve those things at the end of the process. But the truth is, of course, that especially when we're talking about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Tachlis is also the Yesod and the Siva. It is Sof Maaseh b'machshava tchila. The goal is what prompts something happening in the first place. The Leshem develops this idea. Again, it's just at least the way I try to approach this stuff is I have a hard time seeing too much difference and separation between people. So I think whatever is relevant and helps shed some light or is interesting and connected, I think is worth bringing in. The Leshem and the Baal HaSulam are not at all the same thing, but nevertheless, the Leshem talks about and has a little bit of a piece based on something short in the Ramak in the Pardes. In Pardes Rimonim, the Leshem says very explicitly, the Metzias asher nasa b'hamatzl yisbarach shemo hinehu yisodo. The Metzias that is made, so to speak, that initially comes into being within the Matzil, that is the Yesod of the Matzil, meaning the Matzil, of course, is not the Esem of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Matzil is already, right, Ar Ein Sof is the source from which everything else unfolds. There's something always behind that source. And so that reality of the Matzil, of the Ar Ein Sof, of the thing from which everything else begins to come, or the thing that we can start to like conceptualize a little bit, from which everything else starts to unfold, that is the Yesod. Ki alav hu omed v'alav hu noseh la'olam. That Yesod which causes the existence of the Matzil, that is the Yesod, the foundation, the thing that carries all of reality, all of existence in it. V'chein oso hashoresh nelam, and that same hidden shoresh, which we don't understand and can't contemplate, right? The thing that prompts the existence of the Ar Ein Sof. We can't even, right, meaning, we'll talk about this in a little bit, but the Arizal already tells us why the Ar Ein Sof then moves, and there's a movement within the Ar Ein Sof to then produce Tzimtzum, and then produce everything that happens after the Tzimtzum. And the four bechinos of Hispashtos and Histaplos and Hispashtos and Histaplos that really causes everything to unfold. We understand a little bit, or we can put words a little bit to why those things start happening. Here, the Leshem is talking about something behind that. Why does the Ar Ein Sof come into being? Right, the Ar Ein Sof is in and of itself a Netzal, of course. It's the Or of the Ein Sof. The Ein Sof is behind that Or. Or is always a mashal for Ratzon, for the expression of Ratzon. And so there's something that is causing the Ein Sof, Kav Yachol, something causing or prompting the Ar Ein Sof to create, give off, express the Ar Ein Sof, right? It has to be this way. If you think about it, the Ar Ein Sof is a reality in which there is purpose, which there are goals, there are purposes, Chok HaTov Lehetiv, a need for shleimus, like the Arizal says in at the beginning of Shar HaKlolim, at the beginning of Eitz Chaim, the idea of chok hatov lahetiv, right? So within the Ar Ein Sof, there's this principle, this axiomatic a priori principle of chok hatov lahetiv, and therefore everything has to come from that. And because there's a chok hatov lahetiv, and the Ar Ein Sof has to, Kav Yachol has to do good, so therefore there has to be someone to do good too, because if there's no one to do good too, I can't express that goodness to them. And the best way to impart goodness is to have someone to impart goodness and give them the experience of the ultimate good, which is connection to the Or Ein Sof itself, which is the ultimate good, and alignment with the Or Ein Sof, and becoming aware of being and connecting to and being miyuchad with the Or Ein Sof. All of that is the tachlis of Tov, which already lives within the Or Ein Sof. All of that means that the Or Ein Sof operates within a Geder. The Or Ein Sof already operates within a Geder. Not all Mekubalim talk about this. The Arizal certainly doesn't talk about this, but others do talk about this. This is a little bit, at least. There are expressions of the Ein Sof itself, Kaviyachol, that happen before the Or Ein Sof, that produce the Or Ein Sof, so to speak. Because the Or Ein Sof itself is Mugdar. It's so to speak, bound by things. We call it Or Ein Sof, so it's hard to say this. Everything in Chachmas HaEmes really is just a mess of paradoxes and contradictions, so it's okay to say this, but the Or Ein Sof is Ein Sof, and it's limitless and all-powerful and Hakol Yachol, etc., etc. But at the same time, we speak about it in terms of it has to do this. Right? It's driven to do this. It's already Mugdar in a sense. Here, the Lesson is talking about the thing that prompts the existence of that Or Ein Sof, which is all-encompassing, but it's a specific all-encompassing expression of the Ratzon of the Ein Sof, because the Ein Sof could have expressed a Ratzon that somehow didn't require Chok HaTov L'Hetiv. Or, as the Arizal says at the beginning of Shari Gulim B'Yosher, didn't require the shlemus of being able to have full expression with all of the shemos and the kinuyim and different ways in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu is referred to and seen and appreciated and cognized and grasped and so on and so forth. Doesn't have to be that way. The Or Ein Sof, the particular expression of the Ein Sof called Or Ein Sof, is mugdar that way. It's defined that way, but it could have been defined another way. It has to be, because the Or Ein Sof is really, 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 really limitless. So the Or Ein Sof has to be already only a bit of that thing, and it could have been otherwise. He chose it to be this way for whatever reason. But the lesson here is saying that whatever it is, whatever mysterious, unknowable shoresh hanelam that prompts the existence, that original mitzius, bahamatzil, the mitzius of the matzil of the Or Ein Sof, that same shoresh hanelam, which is the yesod, is the foundation, is the cause for the character and reality of the Or Ein Sof, which is the matzil and produces everything else. Hinehu tachliso gamkin. It is also, that very same thing is also its tachlis. Okay? The tachlis of the thing and the siba of the thing, the cause and the goal, are exactly the same. Human beings don't have that exactly. We don't have perfect alignment between our motivations, the things that prompt us to do something or want something, etc., and the goals we have in doing so. We're much more, we're complex, and we're not fully integrated. This is what it means to not be echad yachad umiyuchad. We're not fully integrated. And so there's a disconnect oftentimes, where there's complexity and nuance between what I'm prompted by and what I'm prompted to do, and what I then go ahead and try to achieve. And we mess up all the time. I want this, but then I do that, right? Because something else is operating within me. Anyone ever say the wrong thing to a spouse? That's what happens, right? I want to achieve this. I'm trying to get at that. I'm prompted to do something. And then a completely wrong thing comes out of my mouth because something else got triggered. And then I'm saying the wrong thing. And the thing I'm actually trying to achieve is not at all the thing that was prompting me to open my mouth in the first place, because there's a misalignment. I'm not fully aware, and I'm not fully integrated with all of the purposes behind what I'm doing, with all of the prompts the causes for what I'm doing. And so the goal that I'm trying to achieve, and therefore the actions that I align to achieve that goal are not everything is aligned and integrated. But with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that's of course not the case. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is fully integrated, and there are no parts, and there are no parts to be distant or separated or clashing with each other. Everything is fully integrated. This is why the Shem Havaya is associated with the sphere of Tiferes, because it's full integration. Full integration, not balancing, not a zero-sum game where I have to suppress this in order to allow for that, but full integration of contradictory, paradoxical things all at once. That's the Shem Havaya. That's the transcendence of the Shem Havaya. And that's what we identify with as sort of our clearest association or conception of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So when it comes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of course, the Tachlis is the Yesod. The Yesod is the Tachlis. Sof Maaseh b'machshava tchila. The thing that I want to achieve is exactly what prompts me to do everything that I do. And the thing that is prompting me to do everything that I do is perfectly and exactly aligned with what I'm going to achieve down the line. That's very fundamental to everything the Baal HaSulam is now going to start introducing us to. So Siftala. In order to understand all of these questions and all of these chakiros, one strategy for doing so is to focus on the end result. Kolomar, betachlis habriya, to focus on the purpose, the goal, the objective of creation. You can't understand anything if you look at it in the middle. You can only understand it if you look at it at the end. I just had this experience very tangibly. I just spent the last 18 months building a house. And sadly, I was living 2 blocks away from the house as it was being built. And also sadly, I didn't trust the builder so much. So as it's being built and I'm constantly walking in and out and looking at everything that's being done, I am constantly questioning, criticizing, asking this to be fixed, that to be fixed, etc., because I'm focused on how it looks right now. And this seems wrong and that seems wrong. And instead of focusing and allowing everything to play out as it was going to be played out. And if I look at the end result helps me understand how the process went the way it did. I'm not a professional builder, so I don't know why they do it this way, but they do it this way, and it seems messy and it seems inefficient. But they do it this way. Maybe it was messy and maybe it was inefficient, but nevertheless, it was the way it gets done. Right? Now, thank God, God is much better than my builder. And certainly, when it comes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you can't understand what's going on because there's perfect alignment between cause, goal, and the means between the two that I move me from the cause to achieving the objective. Perfect alignment. There's no mistakes. It has to be that I have to understand and have to look and I have to understand the reality that I'm living in by looking at the goal, by looking at the end result rather than looking at where it might sit right now, because we're not at the end yet. Everything is purposeful. Everything is moving towards that end, because nothing is happening out of plan. It can't be. The Yichud Hashem requires that everything is moving exactly on plan. And in order to understand why any of this stuff that looks like it doesn't make sense, as he raised in the last several shilos, and as he indicated in some of the chakiros, in order to understand all the stuff that doesn't make sense, what I need to do is I need to focus on the end result and then work my way backwards. Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, I purposely didn't spoil myself, so if we're getting there, just tell me to hang on, that's okay. What does looking at an end result, what could that mean for a creature? What can that mean when we're talking about a process like creation?
So it's kind of already what we alluded to, or at least what he's going to say is, let's understand what God is trying to achieve. Why does the Bria exist? Why does the Bria exist? If I understand why the Bria exists, what the Bria is here to do, what it's here to achieve, then I can start fitting in the pieces by looking at where I am now and trying to understand how this fits, how this is getting us there.
Oh, so the Siba is actually more accessible than the Tachlit in that sense?
Well, they're the same thing.
But I can't wait. I want to say though, but like I would have difficulty observing something that I could that I would know was a tachlit, right? As opposed to
Right, because you're not there, we're not there yet. So how do we know?
okay.
So the nice part is like we do know because there's perfect alignment between the Siba and the Tachlis, right? So although we have a time problem, right? We're stuck in the present and the Tachlis is yet to be achieved in the future. And so I don't really know what it is until we've gotten there, right? Um, but I do know what it is because I can look in the past and I can identify the cause.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. V'zeh baruhu she'ein l'cha poel b'li tachlis. It has to be that every action has a purpose. Ki rak mi she'eino shafui b'daito tinse'ehu b'poel tinse'ehu poel b'li tachlis. Only insane people, only crazy people do things without purpose. And the truth is, even crazy people do things with purpose. It might be an irrational purpose, but nothing changes without a prompt. Nothing changes without a purpose. If there's no reason for anything to change, everything stays static. Okay. I'm probably going to make myself sound stupid, and anyone who knows this stuff better will be able to like correct me much about it. But whichever number of Newton's laws of thermodynamics, which says an object in motion stays in motion unless operated on at by an outside force, and an object at rest stays at rest unless operated on by an outside force, the Siba, the Tachlis, is the outside force. Things stay the way they are unless they're being operated on by an outside force. We know this about creation as well. The Arizal at least tells us that before everything, there's an Ar Ein Sof Pashut Mamalik Kol HaMetzias. And that's all there is. It's not even Mamalik Kol HaMetzias. It is Metzias. There is no Metzias. There is no, Metzias is not even an intelligible word in that reality, because all reality is just the Or Ein Sof. The Or Ein Sof is reality. And it is the way it is, and it's always that way, and there is nothing else. And then the Arizal says, Kisha'Allah b'ritzono hanelam, that there's a reason there's a want, there's a desire, there's a prompt for something to be different. That's the only time things start changing. There's a complete stillness. There's complete nothing happening, and nothing has ever changed. There is no time, so it makes no sense to talk about that, but nothing has ever changed. Everything is completely still. There's just pure the nitzlius of the Ar Ein Sof, as far as we're concerned, right? Before the Ar Ein Sof, there was a different nitzlius, but let's just work on the level of Ar Ein Sof. There's just Ar Ein Sof, absolute total stillness, right? Flat water or something, right? When the pirate ship gets stuck on the water because there's no wind and it's just glass, right? Like there's nothing happening, and it's only when that static reality is operated on by an outside force, a ratzon that's driven by a goal, by a purpose, that anything starts to change. And so there's no action, he says, there's no action without a tachlis. There's no action without a tachlis. Anytime we do anything, anytime we move, anytime we think, anytime we blink, there's a purpose behind every little change in reality. There has to be, otherwise it wouldn't change. There has to be a prompt. There has to be something pushing it. There has to be a reason for it to happen. And if creation comes into being, there must be a tachlis behind that as well. There has to be. There's a goal. It's not accidental. It's not happenstance. Even if it was accidental, there's still a prompt causing that accident, although it might be hard to identify what prompt and confluence of exact events causes that accident to happen. But there's still a prompt that's making it happen. perfect storm of different factors combining, and something weird happens, and now reality comes into existence. Okay, obviously, from within this framework, that's not how it's purposeful, it's intentional. But even in that framework, there's a prompt, there's an outside prompt, there's something happening. V'yodeani sheyesh misrachim parkei Torah mitzvos. There are wise people who have thrown off the yoke of Torah mitzvos. She'omrim she'abari yisbarach bara es hametzias va'azav osol nafsho. There are those who say that the reason reality looks the way it does is not because there's a tachlis to everything, and as things are, there's a purpose to them, but rather because God created reality and then left it to its own devices. Ki machmas ha'afisios shebe'elu habrios eina misayin livore yisbarach l'rov romamuso lahashkiach al darchehem ha'pu'utos v'hamagunos. And they say this because the patheticness of creation and the lowliness of creations, the aphisios, the insignificance of the created world is such that it's not worthy, it's inappropriate, it's not matim for the creator to, in all of its highness and of all of its exaltedness, to bother getting his hands dirty, so to speak, with such a pathetic, lowly, disgusting reality. Achein lo midas davruzos. But this makes no sense. This is silly. Ki lo yitachen lahachlit al shifusenu va'afususenu mikerem shenachlit shanachnu asinu es atzmenu v'es kol elu hativim hamukolim hamuganim shabanu. Because this only makes sense if you think that we're responsible for our own existence, right? Again, you can't start off by saying, well, it must be that God has walked away. Because why would God all the way up here bother dealing with us all the way down here? You're already assuming a characterization of us as lowly and maguna and aphisios and so on and so forth, but that can't be. That only makes sense if we brought ourselves into being, if we're responsible for our existence, if we're self-existing. If we're self-existing, self-perpetuating, if we perpetuate ourselves, if we give ourselves life, if we determine our own character, then yeah, maybe what appears to be terrible and awful is really terrible and awful and pathetic. Avo ba be'es she'anu machlitim asher habori yisbarach HaSulam b'kol hashleimus hu Baal hamolacha shebara v'tichen es gufosenu al kol minei netilas hatovos ha'magunos shebehem harei mitachas Yad hapal hashalem lo tetze liolam pu'ula bazuya mukilkelas. But once we say that we exist because of God, we are created by God, we are sustained by God. There's only one ratzon in the world, and ein od milvado. If that ratzon was pulled off for just a second, everything will return to aphisios and totally and completely melt into nothing. And you don't have to be a makubal to say this, right? This is like Parak Aleph, Halacha Aleph, Beis in Mishnah Torah as well, in Yesodei Torah. If God walked away from this for 1 second, none of it is self-sustaining. That means that it can't be that from the absolutely perfect Poel, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, something terrible is coming from. Right? He's challenging one of the premises of Shaila number 3 that he began with, which was, there's something wrong with us. There's the shleimus of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, and we're pathetic and terrible. And here already he's pointing out to us that the premise is wrong. The premise is wrong. It can't be so. It can't be so. If a Kadosh Baruch Hu is shalem b'tachlis hashleimus, it can't be that shleimus is producing the absence of shleimus. And certainly it's not so that that shleimus is producing terrible things. Can't be. V'chol pu'ula me'ida al tiv pu'ula uma ashmaso shel beged mekulkol im eza chayit lo yutzlach tafaraso. Right? It's not the fault. Every product is made on the character and the quality and the abilities of its creator, of its manufacturer. And it's not the fault of a terrible piece of clothing if it was made by a bad tailor. And therefore, it must be the case that unless we're willing to say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a bad creator, it must be that whatever the character of our reality is, and whatever our character is, and whatever our situation is at any given moment, because Mechadesh B'Tuah B'Chol Yom Tamid, we are being made exactly as we are at this moment. Whatever that character is, and whatever the character of the entire world around us is, it has to be good, unless we're willing to say that the person bringing it, the one bringing it into existence, is not good. If we're not willing to grant that point, and if we are willing to grant that point, then we're not really talking about God anymore. It's just, right, it's the God I don't believe in, you don't believe in, I don't believe in either. Like the Kutzker said, right? Like that's just it's not a workable definition of God. It's the thing you're identifying as the maker is sub God by definition, because it's not good. It's something missing. You're just not good at your job, right? So fine, there are lots of people that are not good at their job, but that's the definition of not godliness, is not good, right? So unless we're willing to grant that, it must be that everything is perfectly fine and good as it is right now. It has to be so. It has to be so. Ayin Kagon Zeb Mesechas Tainus Chaf Amud Aleph, and this is what we find in the very famous Gemara in Tainus on Chaf Amud Aleph. Ma'aseh Sheba Rav Elazar, Rav Shimon, Rav Elazar, Rav Shimon. Right, he met this terribly ugly person, and Rav Elazar ben Rav Shimon kind of ignores him when the person greets him, and Rav Elazar said, like, kind of puts him down. He says, right, in his damin lo adam echad shay mechor biyosar, that he meets this terribly ugly person. Amar lo kama mechor oso ish, and he says, wow, you're really ugly. That's not a nice thing to do, but whatever. This is what he said, right? You're really ugly. And the person says back to him, Amar lo. He says back to him, lech the Amar lo uman shasani. Tell the person who made me that I'm so ugly, right? If your clothes are ugly, we can tell the designer that they're a bad designer. That's fine. But when the person is ugly and the only one responsible for that thing is the creator itself, um, can't really say that they made a mistake. Can't really say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu made a mistake. Kama machor kli zesha asisa, right? Go tell the creator that the kli that the creator made, right, this human being, is there's something wrong with it. Hooray. Shemischacham elu lomar shemisivas shiflosenu v'achusosenu ein metayim lo yisparach lashkiach aleinu va'azavosanu. So these people who say, these thinkers, philosophers, I don't know exactly who he's referring to. I don't know if there's a particular thing to hinge the claim on, but these people who claim that it's inappropriate for the high Meromim Hakadosh Baruch Hu to have any actual dealings with the terrible world that exists, and he's just abandoned us because, like, it's broken, and what's more to do? They're revealing their own ignorance, and they're revealing their own silliness. Right? Like, can you imagine a person even a person, right? Forget God. Can you imagine even a person that would intentionally go ahead and create other beings that are intended to suffer and be miserable? Kol yemei chayehem kamonu, like us. We suffer and we're miserable, and we're challenged and we struggle, and lots of bad stuff happens to us, and we experience pain, and so on and so forth. And not only to, like, create them and stick them with all of these difficulties, but then to do so with the intent of walking away, and leaving them to their own devices just so you can like watch them suffer and bumble about? Are you gonna take a baby, throw it into the pool, and to watch it drown? Like, who does that? Who does that? People don't do that. Kama hayis megana muzalzabo, right? How awful, what terrible things are we saying about a person if we describe that someone did such a thing? Someone did such a thing. We think about this, I think, like just on a basic level, like we make calculations about about how many children we're going to have and where we're going to send them to school and what kind of life path we're going to set them. Like, we care about this stuff. Am I going to bring a kid into the world with this financial situation, these difficulties and those difficulties? And like, that's us. That's us. Certainly, by talking how could it be? Can we imagine saying such a thing about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is the only necessary reality that exists at all, right? This is the ultimate. By definition, it's the ultimate. And how could it possibly be that we would never say this about a person, and you're going to go ahead and say this about God? God created a world. God created a really broken world that's really, really terrible. God walked away from the really broken world that's really terrible, and that's why it's so broken and so terrible. And God is God, so like none of that is a surprise. There's no like, oops, surprise, everything got messed up. Oh, this is really frustrating. I'm going to walk away. Like, none of that is at play. So you'd have to say that all of this was intentional and put there in the first place, and God is awful. God is awful. And that might be, but in which case the awful thing that we're referring to is not God. There's something else behind that. That's got to be God, because by definition, God is God. And that's not going to work. And therefore, Haseichel habari mechayev osanu lahaven es hahefech ma'anir v'shtachios lahachlet she'anu be'emes b'rios tovos mina'alos b'yoser ad she'en kates l'chashivosei. Therefore, the seichel, healthy seichel, requires us to appreciate and to understand that the truth is the opposite of what it appears. Olam hafuch ra'isi. The truth is opposite of what it appears. We have to conclude, lahachlet, to conclude, she'anu be'emes b'rios tovos v'na'alos b'yoser ad she'en kates l'chashivosenu. We are not bad. We are not broken. We are not pathetic. We are not insignificant. None of those things can actually be true, regardless of how it appears to us. And we'll have to talk about and explain like why it appears to us that way, right? Because it does appear to us that way. But nevertheless, the appearance is not the truth. It can't be the truth. It has to be that we are actually completely, totally, and impossibly fantastic and perfect and wonderful and good and high and elevated. Ad she'en kates l'chashivusenu. There is no way to even measure how valuable we are. It has to be so. Dahainu mamish ba'ofen harayev amasan l'bala malacha she'asosanu. It has to be that we're good enough to be worthy of the thing that brought us into existence, because that thing doesn't mess up. And if that thing doesn't mess up, that thing is perfect. And it just becomes a constant circular feedback loop. The thing that made us is perfect. That means the thing that it made must be perfect. And if the thing that it made must be perfect, it speaks to the perfection of the thing that made it. And on and on and on and on. And it makes it seem all more perfect and all more good and all more elevated. Any chisaron, any flaws, any deficiencies that we appreciate that we have in our bodies, after all of the explanations and all of the things we're going to come up with to explain the things that are wrong with us and why they're wrong and where they come from and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, God's responsible for that stuff. It has to be God that's responsible for that stuff, unless you want to, stick a pin. Unless you want to cleave a giant cleft in the yichud of Hakadosh Baruch Hu. It has to be that all of that stuff at the end of the day gets thrown back on God. And if all of that stuff gets thrown back on God, Ves Kol Tivin Shabanu, all of the aspects of human nature that we experience, Hare Shebarur Shayia Asanu V'lo Anachnu, it's clear that He made us. We didn't make us. Gam Yada Kol Elu His Haluchos Asher Timshachenu Latzeis Mikol Elu Hativim. Vanatios, Haros, Shanata Banu. He knows all of the consequences. He knows all of the things that we're going to go through. He knows all of the roads we're going to follow and the things that are going to unfold and that are going to continue from the fact that we have the nature that we have and we have the tendencies that we have. We have the character that we have, good, bad, etc., etc. It's all him and it's all already built in. And if it's all there already, it can't be that any of this is bad. Can't be. Elohu hadavar asher amarnu. This is what we started off with. This is what we said before. It has to be that we have to look at the end. Then we'll be able to understand everything. And this is the mashal that people say, Al tira davar l'shota b'emtza malachto. Don't show anything to an idiot while the thing is in the middle of being made. Because the idiot's not going to appreciate because they're not going to appreciate that there's something valuable happening. They're just going to see the mess, and they're going to see the way the sausage is being made. But the sausage is delicious if you just wait for it to be finished. Right? The sausage is fantastic at the end, and likewise here too. Everything is fantastic in the end. It has to be fantastic in the end. But the truth is. And this is, I think, what he's developing in these two paragraphs that we just went through. The truth is that it's also fantastic in the present. It has to be fantastic in the present, as well as fantastic in the end. There's a shift in perspective. It doesn't seem fantastic in the present, and it will seem fantastic in the end, but nevertheless, in reality, it has to also be fantastic in the present. Otherwise, you have to, again, saddle HaKadosh Baruch Hu with guilt for messing up. The Kvar Haranu Chazal. Okay, one more paragraph. One more paragraph. The Kvar Haranu Chazal. The Arizal has already taught us in Eitz Chaim. Shelo bar Kadosh Baruch Hu olam ela b'chtei lahanos l'nivrav. So now if we're focusing on tachlis, if we're focusing on the purpose and understanding the purpose, which allows us to understand the cause, will allow us to also see everything that happens in between in perspective as leading from the beginning to that tachlis. So what's the tachlis? Shelo bar Kadosh Baruch Hu olam ela b'chtei lahanos l'nivrav. The reason for creation is so that HaKadosh Baruch Hu could give joy, pleasure, enjoyment to the Nivraim. V'kan anu tzrichim lahasim al inyanenu v'chol machshavosenu ki hu sof hakavana v'hamasa shel b'ris ha'olam. And we have to appreciate and focus on this fact that this is the kavana, this is the goal, this is the intent behind b'ris ha'olam. V'yesh lehisponin if the purpose of creation is to give hana, is to give pleasure, enjoyment to the nivraim, and the ultimate pleasure, enjoyment, of course, is the experience of godliness, because God is the ultimate good. So, but if the purpose is to give pleasure and goodness and enjoyment to the nivraim, to the creations, Hare hechrech hu, it has to be so, shebara b'neshamos midas ratzon gedola ad ma'od lekabel es asher chashav litin lahem. It has to be that part of the bria includes a powerful, strong desire that's created within the nivran, that's created within creations, to receive that which is being given. This is fundamental to the entire universe of the Baal HaSulam, this idea. Share midas gadlo shel kol tainuk hu v'chol hana meduda b'midas gadlo shel haratzon l'kabloso. Because the measure of any enjoyment and every pleasure corresponds in direct proportion to the desire to have that pleasure and have that enjoyment. Ad shekol haratzon l'kablo gadol yoser hine b'shir hazeh midas hataina gadola b'yoser. However much more the desire for the thing is, the enjoyment of having the thing becomes bigger and greater and more powerful. And to the extent that the desire for the thing is less, then in that same measure, the enjoyment that's received by having that thing is likewise reduced. Right? We see this by, it doesn't matter how good the food is. If I don't have an appetite, the food is not enjoyable. Okay? And the more of an appetite I have, the more enjoyable the food is. And the same is true for anything. Hare shemachsheves habriya ba'atzma mechayeves behechrach livro b'neshamos ratzon lakabel b'shir mufraz b'yoser. And so what does this mean? This means that the machshaves habriya ba'atzma, the purpose, the idea behind creation in and of itself, which is lehetiv l'nivrav, the whole idea behind creation is to give goodness to the creations, to give goodness to a created reality that's outside of Kadosh Baruch Hu, because chol katov lehetiv, and that's the best way to be mativ, is to give goodness to something outside yourself. That machshava, that kavana, that purpose, that tachlis requires the creation of a ratzon lakabel. And not just any ratzon lakabel, but a very, very powerful, strong, huge, expansive ratzon lakabel. Because the bigger the ratzon lakabel, the bigger the tainug. And chok hatov lahetiv is the essential characteristic of the Or Ein Sof, and that's unlimited. So there's an unlimited desire on the part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so to speak, to give pleasure to us, to give goodness, and that requires that entails giving pleasure to us, right? For us to enjoy. Us enjoying requires us to have a powerful, truly never-ending appetite for the thing being given. And so by default, creation now requires behechrach. Again, it doesn't require this on the level of like prior to the Or Ein Sof, but within the Or Ein Sof, within that tiny sliver of potential, what could have been, what the Ein Sof itself could have decided to do, it's decided to create this reality called the Or Ein Sof, characterized by chol katov lehetiv, and within that reality, it's necessary. Within that reality, it's necessary that creation is defined by a ratzon lakabel, because that's the only thing that can fulfill the tachlis of creation, which is to be meitiv l'nivran, because being meitiv, tainug, enjoyment, depends on appetite. And so we have to have a huge appetite, a huge ratzon lakabel. Amesam lemidas hatainag hagadol kol yochuso chashol l'saneg al es haneshamos. Ki hatainag hagadol v'haratzon l'kabel hagadol olam b'kana echad. Because the ratzon l'kabel and the tainug are all directly proportionate to each other. They go in the same line. They're directly proportionate to each other. Now, we'll get into this Be'ezras Hashem next week, but as a preface, just a preface, this is part of why this idea that the ratzon lehetiv that exists within the Or Ein Sof, which is the ultimate expression of the Or Ein Sof, the ultimate hispashtos from the Or Ein Sof, is the ultimate expression of the ratzon of the Or Ein Sof, necessitates within itself, is the Or of the Or Ein Sof, necessitates within itself a ratzon lakabel in order for the Or of the Or Ein Sof, which is going out, the hashpa, the chasadim, the ratzon lahashpos, to give, to be meitiv, requires a ratzon lakabel. Ratzon lakabel is a kli. By definition, ratzon lakabel is a kli. A ratzon lakabel is a sense of emptiness, is a sense of chisaron. If I'm not hungry, there's no space for more food. I can't enjoy the food. If I feel empty, which is the very definition of kli, empty space to be filled by something outside itself, that's what a kli is. Now, that's a ratzon lakabel. Ratzon lakabel is kli, but the kli itself, and this is fundamental in Chassidus, the kli itself is or. The kli itself is or because it's just the flip side of the ratzon lahashbos, the ratzon lahetiv that's coming from the or in self itself. Okay, so Be'ezus Hashem, we'll get into that more next week, but this week we talked about that in order to start answering any of these questions and understanding any of these chakiros, what we need to do is we need to look at the tachlis. Looking at the tachlis really requires us to look at the siba, at the cause, because sof masa b'machshava tchila, the only way we can understand where we're headed is to understand where we're coming from, and the two are exactly the same when it comes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And by understanding the cause, by understanding the goal, we can now understand and appreciate that nothing along the way is out of whack, is out of line. And what that means is that all of the flaws and all of the deficiencies and all of the bad aspects that we experience both in ourselves and in the world around us and in others and so on and so forth have to be exactly the way they are, because otherwise that requires us to saddle the borei with all sorts of unpleasant and unsavory things. And that's impossible by definition to stick the borei with, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is shalom b'tachlis hashleimus and perfect in every single way. In which case we too are perfect exactly as we are in every single way. Ad ein kates l'chashivusenu, as the Baal HaSulam said, until there you can't even measure in any way, shape, or form how valuable and important we are. And the tachlis of the bria in and of itself, he says, and drawing from the Arizal, is lehetiv l'nivrav, chok hatov lehetiv. That's the goal here. That goal is coming from a ratzon, or produces a deep ratzon lahashbos, a deep ratzon lehetiv. Being able to be mative to us requires a corresponding desire to receive that hatava so that it's actually experienced as good. If you shove the best food or the most amazing drink down my throat when I'm not hungry or I'm not thirsty, it's not enjoyable. So by definition, the tachlis and the kavana and the machshava behind creation necessitates a ratzon lakabel on the part of the nivran, and that ratzon lakabel, in order to affect and achieve the goal behind creation, that ratzon lakabel has to be enormous. In fact, it has to be enormous ad ein kates, because the ratzon lahashbos is enormous, and the ratzon lahetiv is enormous ad ein kates, and correspondingly, the ratzon lakabel has to be enormous ad ein kates. And as we'll see, this then by default becomes the source of all of the problems and all of the perceived deficiencies and all of the klipa and all of the sitra achra and all of the yitzhara, et cetera, that we've been talking about, or that he was questioning and wondering about until now, because we by definition have to have this deep ratzon lakabel in order to effectuate the achievement of the machshava and tachlis of the bria, and from there everything else will fall into place. It'll just take another 65 paragraphs to get there. Be'ezus Hashem, we will. Have a fantastic night.